end of the world. I could feel all this death.
Everything they built will fall! And from the ashes of their world, we'll build a better one! I've never felt power like this before.
Millions of Americans this morning face the threat of flooding. Torrential downpours of swollen rivers in Illinois and Missouri. Mandatory evacuations are underway at this hour. In Missouri, flooding is blamed for at least 13 deaths.
The Mississippi River could reach about 14 feet above its flood stage in St. Louis. Flooding may affect about 18 million people in states along the river from Illinois to Louisiana. Anna Werner is in West Alton, Missouri, where residents have been told to get out. Anna, good morning.
Good morning. This is what you are seeing in a lot of areas around St. Louis, or they're waiting for it to happen. This is river water coming this way, and it looks like kind of just a generic area or a field. But if I walk over here, you can see where we really are. This is supposed to be the southbound lane of US 67, but as you can tell, there's no divided highway here. Because of the severity of this flooding, then the National Guard has been activated statewide to help fight the floods.
The water has surrounded West Alton, Missouri, where residents were told Tuesday it's time to leave.
We emptied our basement out of anything important. We cleaned out the house of clothes.
As the Mississippi River threatened St. Louis County, it took teamwork to fill 20,000 sandbags. Officials pleaded for help, and the community responded.
Just like the movie Field of Dreams, if you build it, they'll come.
The Army Corps of Engineers is monitoring 19 vulnerable levees on the rising Mississippi River and its tributaries. Missouri Governor Jay Nixon.
Water levels in some locations are predicted to exceed the historic crest during the Great Flood of 1993.
This was Hannibal, Missouri in July 1993, when the river crested 22 feet above flood stage. 9 states saw flooding, 50 people died. Nearly 150 major rivers and tributaries were affected. And the floodwaters caused a spectacle.
I drove in from Kansas last night just to come over here and look at this.
After flooding pushed untreated sewage from this plant into nearby rivers and streams, residents of High Ridge, Missouri fortified their treatment plant to keep the flood out of the drinking water supplied to thousands. In Union, Missouri, water crept up over porch steps as rescue boats skipped by. Cindy Nations claims her neighborhood isn't prone to flooding.
And they would not sell me flood insurance. So I've never been concerned about it.
Hundreds of people have been evacuated. We have several structures and homes that are underwater right now, and the National Guard has been activated as a serious river flooding situation is ongoing and just going to continue to go on over the next several days. That's the Merrimack River in Missouri, just one example of the river flooding that's going on right now. Now, this all initially started with flash flooding, and most of these deaths, this is how many people have died from flooding alone over the last several days. At least 22 people between 4 states. A lot of those deaths were from people trying to drive through low water crossings. Now, the Mississippi River is the one that's rising a lot right now, of course, along with a lot of other ones. But here's just one example. 6 days ago in St. Louis, okay? Notice where that water level is. And then yesterday, you can see how it's a whole lot higher. Now, cities like St. Louis, they're protected pretty well by flood walls. This is not going to be like the 1993 flood, but other cities not so lucky. Look at this. West Alton, just a little bit north of St. Louis, started dealing with some serious flooding Tuesday night when a levee broke. This is one of the specific spots where the National Guard was activated. A lot of people have been evacuated, and it's still an ongoing situation as people just trying to get the water out.
The Katz family, a blended modern-day Brady Bunch with 5 children and dogs, lives in a temporary home.
It's disgusting what's going on. I'm heartbroken. I mean, we had to leave our beautiful home.
They're 33 miles from the house they vacated in Porter Ranch, a Los Angeles suburb reeling from a massive methane gas leak.
The smell can cause you to be nauseated. It can cause to give headaches, nosebleeds, which I have had, stomach problems.
Infrared video taken by environmental activists shows a noxious plume rising over Porter Ranch from the Aliso Canyon storage facility, owned by Southern California Gas. The utility says the underground leak, first detected in October, may not be stopped until late March.
We're drilling a relief well. That relief well is going to go way down, about 8,500 feet. It's going to intersect with the leaking well and then pump liquids and muds down there to stop the flow of gas, and then cement to permanently abandon the well.
While SoCal Gas drills, it's paying for residents of 2,200 Porter Ranch homes to stay in temporary housing, including Yitz Deckel.
It's a slow-moving tsunami of evacuees. People realize that this is serious stuff.
The gas company adds more than 6,000 people are seeking financial aid due to the leak, many of them applying for help at a community center it established. Some government agencies are now taking extreme precautions. The FAA invoked a no-fly zone to 2,000 feet and a half-mile around the leak site in response to fears gas fumes could be ignited by aircraft above. The LA Unified School District closed 2 schools below the leak and is transferring almost 1,900 students. That means 2 of the Katz boys will start class on a new campus after winter break. And the family says 2-year-old Ava has suffered the most. The Katz's claim in one of several lawsuits against SoCal Gas, the leak resulted in upper respiratory symptoms that left Ava in intensive care for 4 days. The suit adds Ava had no prior health problems and experienced some form of seizure.
Even though we're so upset and saddened and stressed, trying to hold it together for them. You know, it's hard. We're a big family.
Just one family moved out by a gas leak disaster that might be unseen and is still months away from being undone.
You say this is the biggest environmental disaster since the BP oil spill. Why do you say that?
Because it is BP, it's the BP oil spill just on land. And this is a situation where it's very deep. There was a valve in place that would prevent this type of disaster that Southern Cal Gas removed and never replaced. And now we face this disaster in real time. And all this gas is just billowing out, if you will, just like it did in BP. And the magnitude of it is significant. The depth, the length of time that these people in the community have been assaulted, which is ongoing now for months, the amount of time it's going to take for them to shut this off. And just in 3 months, we've had 150 million pounds of methane spewing into the environment. And if this goes on 4 more months, 5 more months, you could double or triple that number.
So in a statement to CNN, SoCal Gas does say this, quote, "We're working hard to both stop the leak and to address their concerns. We are providing relocation services for residents who wish to remove themselves from the leak's odor and have established a claims process for those who feel they may have suffered harm or injury. Beyond that, we are not going to comment on the legal action and will respond to the lawsuit through the judicial process.
This is an ongoing assault. They knew it was happening. There was oversight failures.
You think they knew about it
failures.
before October 2015?
We definitely know that they knew the well was bad. We definitely know that they knew back in 1979 that that safety valve that they removed should have been replaced. And yes, there's indication that they knew about this leak prior to October 23rd. That's just when they reported it.
Well, we had an earthquake this morning in Oklahoma, pretty close to Oklahoma City. This was in Edmond. You can see some damage there, broken mirror. I will tell you that is the worst damage picture I've seen floating around on social media. So this was not a major big earthquake that caused major damage. I haven't heard of any injuries or anything like that, but you can see just north of Oklahoma City, a lot of people felt it, and it was something that woke a lot of people up, I'm sure. 4.3 on the Richter scale. That's what the U.S. Geological Survey has initially. And one really interesting thing about this earthquake, and we see this from time to time, when the earthquake hit, all the birds just take flight because it probably woke them up too. And you can actually see that on the radar because there's nothing falling out of the sky that the radar would be picking up.
A strong earthquake hit the border region between India and Myanmar early Monday morning. Reports continue to vary, but according to the Associated Press, citing local police, the quake has killed at least 4 people and injured 50. The U.S. Geological Survey says the 6.7 magnitude quake hit India's northeastern state of Manipur at 4:35 a.m. local time, with its epicenter located some 30 kilometers northwest of the state capital, Imphal, at a depth of 55 kilometers. We'll bring you more updates on this story in our later newscasts as the story develops.
Multiple deaths being reported and over 100 people have been injured as a 6.8 magnitude earthquake has hit in northeast India. This was about 40 miles west of the Myanmar border in the northeastern state of Manipur. It was in a city called Imphal, okay? It's a pretty big city. It has about 270,000 people. It's actually the capital of that state. And you can see a 6.8 earthquake is something that can do a lot of damage. It can injure a lot of people and it can kill a lot of people. And don't be surprised if the death toll continues to rise a little bit over the next couple of days, because this is an ongoing situation. The problem with this earthquake is that it hit while it was dark outside. It was the very early morning hours. A lot of people were still sleeping, and the rescue efforts are still ongoing as we speak. It's been pretty tough going, though, because power and communication links are down in the region.
Colonel, I want to turn to ISIS. ISIS released a new propaganda video featuring what appears to be a new British militant, Jihadi John type, threatening the UK. Let's take a listen to that.
Wage jihad, break borders, and one day invade your land.
So I'm wondering, Colonel, what do you make of those kinds of threats?
Well, clearly ISIS has been following through on its threats. I think if ISIS threatens something, and it is the best funded terrorist organization ever in history. So if they make a threat, they're going to try to deliver on that threat. And more importantly here, they continue to use these sorts of things as a method of recruiting. They are being seen as a strong horse. Obviously, a lot of things still coming to them regarding resources and people. They're still being very effective in that. What we have to do are 2 things. First, go about trying to attack and do a counter message to this. We've not done well on this. We need to look at Islamic groups who are willing to work with us. We work with one, my think tank works with one in London called the Association of British Muslims. They are trying to de-radicalize the folks who are joining. This guy probably is British. We want to work on that. And more importantly, we need to do some military action to take out the ISIS leadership to slow them down. They're on their game plan. They're clearly executing what they want to do. They're making threats. We need to get in front of that plan and upset it. And then create conditions and time then for other elements to come in and kind of settle the issue. But this is a multifaceted issue. This guy's but one more coming up. They've been very successful in propaganda. This is a continuation of their very successful propaganda program.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Stephen D'Souza is tracking this story. He joins me now from New York. Steve, this is thought to be the biggest mass execution for terror offenses in Saudi Arabia since 1980. What can you tell us about them?
There were 47 executions in all, and they took place across the country, many of them
by beheading, and the majority were actually Sunni Muslims who were convicted of crimes related to terrorism linked to groups like Al-Qaeda. But the small minority and, as you mentioned off the top, the Shia cleric, Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, the most prominent of those executed today. He was arrested for anti-government protests in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia in 2011 and 2012, and many people thought that the charges against him were more political than terrorism related, and they were hoping that he would receive a royal pardon, but in fact that did not happen, and he was among those executed today. And Saudi Arabia saying that this was all for terrorist-related acts and that anyone convicted of that would face justice and that they would apply justice equally, whether the perpetrators be Sunni or Shia.
There's a lot of religious rivalry across the Middle East, and these executions have prompted a lot of anger. Tell us more about that.
Well, Shia-dominated Iran is Saudi Arabia's main rival in the region, and they have condemned the execution today of the cleric and saying that there will be consequences, as well. Iran's leadership posting a tribute to Sheikh Nimr on Twitter as well. In the parts of Saudi Arabia where the protest took place a few years ago, protests again erupting today, calling for the downfall of the Saudi royal family. Similar protests taking place in Bahrain as well. And so a lot of statements of condemnation from Iraq. Leadership there saying that at a time when people are trying to get away from sectarian tension, that countries like Saudi Arabia should not be inflaming it. However, in the U.S., we should look for perhaps a more muted response. The U.S. is a strong supporter of Saudi Arabia, and as one human rights expert told me, they're no strangers to executions themselves. And perhaps another consequence of these executions, terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula have said they will attack and there will be consequences to Saudi Arabia if they execute their members, and that's exactly what's happened. So remains to be seen what happens on that front.
All right, thanks, Steve. The CBC's Stephen D'Souza in New York.
We are keeping a close eye on the Middle East today as tensions continue to rise between regional superpowers. Saudi Arabia and Iran broke off diplomatic relations after a prominent cleric was executed. NBC's Bill Neely reports.
Tensions are growing with mass demonstrations above all in Iran at the killing of a Shia cleric by its main Sunni rival Saudi Arabia. Protests from India, where rioters condemned Saudi Arabia, to Bahrain, where Shia crowds called for the death of the Saudi royal family. The diplomatic spat is growing too. Saudi diplomats have left Iran after crowds burned the Saudi embassy. Their spokesman giving Iranian diplomats 48 hours to leave Saudi. The cleric killed was buried quietly, but the execution of 47 men has echoed around the Muslim world. Nimr al-Nimr was an internationally known Shia scholar, harshly critical of the Saudi regime, which executed him for inciting its Shia minority. Iran's supreme leader warned Saudi Arabia would face divine revenge for a crime. The execution has inflamed tensions. The two countries' war of words now worse than ever.
And the US is now very concerned, not just that diplomatic ties have been cut, but the effect that could have on the war in Syria and planned peace talks. Iran and Saudi Arabia, of course, back different sides in that war. There is no sign this will boil over into conflict between the two. Not yet anyway, but this is serious. Back to you.
Bahrain and Sudan have cut diplomatic ties with Iran following a similar move by Saudi Arabia. The Bahraini Information Ministry says it has decided to break off diplomatic relations with the Islamic Republic. The move comes in the wake of Iranian criticism of Saudi Arabia's execution of Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr and 3 other Shia activists on Saturday. Manama has asked Iranian diplomats and their families to leave its soil within the next 48 hours. Sudan's foreign ministry said its decision is in response to the storming of the Saudi embassy in Tehran. The United Arab Emirates, another Saudi ally, has recalled its ambassador from Tehran and downgraded diplomatic representation to the level of chargé d'affaires. The UAE also slashed the number of Iranian and Emirati diplomats in respective
People
capitals.
are going crazy on social media. That is very apparent. If you go on Twitter, you can't miss it at this point. A lot of people didn't see it at first because the parade, as you mentioned, was kind of coming to its end. The parade goes for about 2 miles, but somebody tapped us on the shoulder and said, "Hey, look, what's going on?" And we looked up in the sky, and I saw about 6 planes. And at first, they were flying in perfect formation. I thought that maybe it was military planes. I wasn't sure. And then all of a sudden, we saw it spewing out letters. And I thought, what is it going to say? And then the message came. You mentioned the message. We couldn't even get the entire message in a picture because it was so enormous. You can see this message from about a 10-mile radius. And, of course, it dissipates. And then they did it a second pass. They did it a second time.
The thing I see out there just happened today in Tehran. They're burning down the Saudi embassy. You see that. Now, what that is Iran wants to take over Saudi Arabia. They always have. They want the oil, okay? They've always wanted that. They have a bunch of dishonest people. They've created ISIS. Hillary Clinton created ISIS with Obama. Created with Obama.
Leave the house dressed as I want to dress. I don't have to worry about am I hiding anything. Allows quicker access time to my firearm if I need it.
The new law went into effect on Friday, which allows licensed Texans for the first time since 1871 to carry a holstered pistol in public. Supporters said the law would enhance public safety in a state of 27 million people, while opponents said it could be chilling for the public to see armed people on city streets and inside public buildings and designated stores. Law enforcement officials also voiced a concern about how to approach an unfolding crime scene when multiple people can be seen with weapons. The law specifically bans the carrying of guns, either openly or concealed, in places including schools, bars, sports arenas, and secure areas of airports.
A group of militiamen with guns are refusing to leave a federal building at a wildlife refuge in the U.S. state of Oregon. The men took over the headquarters of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge on Saturday and said they're not coming out until their demands are met. According to CNN, it's not exactly clear what those demands are at this time. The men were part of a rally supporting 2 local ranchers who'd been jailed when some broke off and occupied the building. The ranchers are father and son Dwight and Stephen Hammond, who were convicted of setting fires on federal land. Their ranch borders that refuge. Saturday's rally formed in a nearby town as the Hammonds were preparing to report for more jail time after losing a federal appeal. One protester said the case is bigger than the Hammonds. It's about the government violating the Constitution. Another protester hinted at the possibility of violence.
I like to say that let us be civil and let us be as gentle as possible, but we shall be as firm as necessary.
Protest organizers have clashed with the government before over land management. One organizer's family staged an armed protest outside his father's ranch in Nevada last year. Harney County, Oregon Sheriff David Ward said the protesters' real motive is to overthrow the county and federal government and spark a nationwide movement.
Mike, a group of men and women, mostly from out of town, have taken over a wildlife refuge headquarters which is owned by the federal government. They feel as though places like this is a wildlife refuge that the federal government took over. They bought land and made this a refuge for people, but not for ranchers, for farmers, for those who are trying to make a living off the land. This was saved for animals and for people to come out and see it. And they're saying, look, this land once belonged to ranchers. The federal government came in and bought that or took some of that land away, according to them, and they do not think that the federal government had the right to do that. And so they've decided to take it over until it is given back to the local people. We had a conversation with the person who is leading this effort, saying that they're simply here because they say that the federal government has overstepped its bounds.
We're going to stay here until we have secured the land and the resources back to the people of Harney County, and where they can get back to ranching, get back to logging, get back to using these lands without feeling fear and intimidation, and that's our goal.
Now, as far as a police presence, so far there is none. There are no local police, no federal police, no state police, no police whatsoever in this area. I do need to remind you that we are about 30 miles from anywhere. The town, Burns, is about 30 miles down the road here. They have taken over a small area, and they said they have done any damage to it. They are not hurting anyone, and they won't hurt anyone, but they do warn that if the federal government decide to try and storm the building, for example, then their reaction may be different. We do know that they are armed. The reaction from the federal government, as we understand it, at least the locals are saying, that there will be a command center, a police command center set up at some point today. We have not seen that yet. Mike?
Anti-government protesters hit the streets of Burns, Oregon today. Thanks for watching KOIN 6 News at 5:30. I'm Chris Holmstrom. Militia groups from out of state came to show support for 2 Oregon ranchers who must go back to prison for starting fires that burned on federal land, even though they already served time for the charges. Jennifer Dowling has more from Burns, Oregon, where the protests wrapped up just a little while ago. Good evening, Jennifer.
Good evening, Chris. It's quite chilly here in Burns, and temperatures were in the teens earlier in the day. And that may have prohibited some of those folks from coming out who intended to. However, they still had a very good showing. Folks from as far away as Ohio and Arizona showed up here to show support for Dwight Hammond, and he said he appreciated that outpouring. It was a day filled with passion for protesters.
We're here to stand up for our brothers and sisters and show the world, show America that we stick together.
And emotion for 73-year-old Dwight Hammond.
It's the most humbling experience that anybody could have.
More than 100 carrying signs and flags.
Go Hammond! Yeah!
Marching in a convoy to the rancher's home. To show their support.
Appreciate all you people being here, but it's not about me. It's about America. And somehow we got to get the wheels back on this wagon because they're flying off.
Court documents state that Hammond and his son Stephen were charged with arson after starting what they claimed were controlled burns on their ranch or near its boundary in 2001 and 2006. Those fires burned lands that they leased from the BLM for cattle grazing. The two said they were trying to control invasive species on their property and prevent wildfires, but they were convicted in 2012. Dwight serving 3 months, his son about a year. Then in 2014, supporters say the federal prosecuting attorney appealed the sentence.
It's clearly double jeopardy. They've already served their time.
An appeals panel decided the sentence needed to be longer to match the charge, and they were told they'd have to go back to prison for 4 to 5 more years.
They wanted to charge Dwight and Steve for this fire that was 12 years old. They couldn't do it because the statute of limitations was gone, so they had to use the terrorism, anti-terrorism. And these people are no closer to terrorists than you or I.
Some protesters also blame the Harney County Sheriff for not protecting the residents of the county from the federal government. They threw pennies onto the sidewalk in front of Sheriff David Ward's office. While some locals marched with this group, others felt it was too much, some posting signs to protest the protesters.
I want them to go home. We take care of ourselves here, you know.
I don't think that all of these outsiders coming here is necessary. I think they intimidate the local people.
Hammond and his son say they will turn themselves in peacefully before the deadline Monday. Dwight says it feels like a life sentence at his age.
This makes it over for me. Not very happy about that. Don't know what to say. It just seems like a little overreach for having burned 127 acres.
And we reached out to the sheriff here for comment on the protests. However, he did not get back to us as of news time tonight. We also called U.S. Attorney Bill Williams for comment. He didn't get back this weekend either. Back to you, Chris.
President Obama says he will use much of his final year in the White House pushing for gun control. He is planning a series of executive actions which would not require approval from Congress. Chip Reed has more from Hawaii, where the president is winding down his holiday vacation.
It was just after the mass shooting at an Oregon community college in October that the president decided he had to take executive action on guns. He made the announcement in his weekly address posted on the White House website.
Months ago, I directed my team at the White House to look into any new actions I can take to help reduce gun violence. And on Monday, I'll meet with our Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, to discuss our options.
Sources tell CBS News those options include expanding the definition of who is in the business of selling guns so that more gun sales trigger background checks, and requiring enhanced reporting and tracking of lost and stolen guns. The president blamed the Republican Congress for giving him no choice but to take unilateral action.
We know we can't stop every act of violence, but what if we tried to stop even one? What if Congress did something, anything, to protect our kids from gun violence?
Last month, Senate Republicans blocked Democratic proposals that would prevent people on the terror watch list from buying guns and require background checks for online gun purchases.
Basically all you do.
Meanwhile, some states are taking action on their own. In California, a new gun control law that took effect yesterday allows judges to order the seizure of guns from people deemed dangerous by their own family or by law enforcement. Texas, though, is going the other direction on gun control, with a new law allowing guns to be carried openly in public places. The NRA did not respond to our request for a comment, but when the details of the president's plan are announced, which could be as early as next week, the response from gun rights supporters is expected to be furious.
There's a couple of points to come out of this document, which is a sort of official document that Russia has to update every 6 years. It was last updated in 2009, so time was ripe for this new description, essentially, of the threats to the Russian state as the Kremlin sees it. It says that it sees the expansion of NATO, the Western military alliance, as a major threat to Russia's national interests. And it also says that's because of Russia's, what it calls, independent domestic and foreign policy, which has triggered a counteraction from the United States and its allies. And so I think the reference there is to the fact that Russia has engaged in military activities in Ukraine. It's engaged in Syria as well, carrying out airstrikes against ISIS and other rebel groups in support of Bashar al-Assad and his allies. And that's angered somewhat the United States specifically, but also NATO countries in general. And so this is a formal document, essentially, which says, look, NATO is a threat to Russia's national interests, but it doesn't necessarily represent a big shift in the thinking of Russia. Russia, and Putin in particular, has been describing NATO as a strategic threat to Russia for some years now. And indeed, that threat has come to a head over the conflict in Ukraine, where Russia has essentially deployed military forces, although it denies this, to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO and other Western institutions. So it wants to prevent the spread and the expansion, the further expansion of NATO, and it's made that now a priority in terms of its national security.
We just turned this around. These are from moments ago in Dubai in the UAE. This is catastrophic right here. These are unbelievable images of a fire at it's the Address Hotel. Authorities right now are on site trying to address this. But this is a luxury hotel in Dubai. You can see onlookers there. It's unclear right now what the situation is, if there are injuries. It's a 5-star hotel there, 63 stories, according to reports that I'm reading. And this is something that right now, 300 meters tall, this building. It's actually not far from the New Year's Eve fireworks display that was there in Dubai. We're going to continue. And this is actually new video that we're bringing in. This is obviously very alarming, the images that we're seeing of this fire just engulfing the side of this luxury hotel, 63 stories high in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates.
You know, again, with this event going on behind, it's sad. There was a large explosion just now.
We just saw that.
So that was probably one of the restaurants. So that's those buildings are serviced by LP, natural gas. So there could be an issue there.
And what's your understanding of? I know you said you have frequented the Address. Are there several restaurants, you know, throughout that building? Say one on the rooftop or midway. I heard one of the patrons who was at a restaurant on the ground level earlier describe what she thought the fire to begin on the 20th floor at the mezzanine. Would the mezzanine be on the 20th floor?
No. So the restaurants are probably in. There's a ground floor level that would be the lobby. And that maybe a couple floors down, all the way to what would be the level of where the fountains would be, the Dubai fountains, and maybe one level up. And after that, there's all hotel and residence until you get to the very top. And then there's one nightclub restaurant called Neo's on the 63rd floor. So between that, those are all just apartments.